Okay, so thank you again for joining us. This is the K-State Career Center, and we are talking about job search strategies, success for international students. Here at the Career Center, we know that there are many specific criteria, situations, policies, visa immigration policies that you have to adhere to or consider when you're looking for jobs. And so we just wanted to kind of review some of the resources that we have here in the Career Center, and also just some good tips that we've learned kind of over the years. So that is what we're talking about today. And so here is again just a little preview of what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to be talking about how to identify employers, identify international friendly employers, what resources are available. Then we're also going to be talking about resumes and CVs, the differences, what to include and what not to include, personalizing or editing the documents for each specific position, and so forth. I also think it's important at this point to talk about possible bias. So what are some questions that employers are allowed to ask, but at the same time, what are they not allowed to ask? Do I list my full name on my applications or on my resumes, things like that? And then finally, what I've put on the slide are immigration questions, or those questions that you commonly get when you apply to jobs regarding your immigration status and how to answer some of those. So how do you talk about your work authorization and so forth? So that's kind of what we're going to be going over. If at any time anyone has specific questions, please drop a note in the chat and I will address those. Otherwise, we'll just keep going. And like I said, at the very end of the presentation, I think the slides, we only have maybe about 10 or 11 slides. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll kind of go into specifics about addressing some of your particular questions that you submitted with your registration. So that's what we're doing today. So I think it's important before we get started and before when I meet with any new students in an appointment, I kind of start by asking some of these questions that you can now see on your screen. So what are your goals? I think it's always good to kind of manage expectations before jumping into a job search. So thinking about questions such as, where do I want to be located? Is there a specific place that I have to be located or must be located just because of financial reasons, maybe family obligations and reasons, things like that? So where do I want to be located for my job here in the United States? Duration of work. So I think it's important to understand, okay, how soon do I need to be applying in order to start a job at this time? Or how much time do you get? Do you know if you only are eligible for that 1 year, or do you have more time because of what you're studying, or because of any other type of sponsorship that that company may be willing to do? So how much time do you have to work with authorization or with sponsorship in the future? On the same lines of that, I think it's also important to understand what is the timeline to apply for that work authorization. So OPT, for instance, has a certain amount of time before your completion and after your completion of when you could apply for work authorization. And so you just need to make sure you understand when those application times are and how that will affect, thinking about the processing times that will take with the government and how long potentially that employer may be willing to wait for you in order to get your final work authorization or EAD card. Do you know if you're eligible for a STEM extension? Do you know if you are wanting or needing sponsorship, or are you okay to just work in the United States for a year and then return to your home country? What does that look like for you? And last but certainly not least, what type of a work environment are you looking for? Some of you did ask questions about, how do I know if an employer is international friendly or if I'll be safe and welcomed in that work environment? And so that is a very big factor when looking for jobs, is what type of office do you want to be working with? Will you be remote? Will you be in person? Just things like that. So again, that overarching theme of what are your goals? Now, before we move on, I do also want to bring up that if any of you, I know that so much of this ties directly to OPT or the STEM extension and deadlines and applications and so many other very specific items pertaining to your visa status. At all times, remember, any immigration questions should always be directed to International Student Scholar Services, to your international advisors. So today's presentation is going to be all about the job search strategies and that preparation to finding the job. But as always, any specific immigration questions should be directed to ISSS. Quick little break just to look at the chat. Okay, yep, we are going to address your question that you sent about specific questions about on applications. And so we are going to be addressing that. You have a very specific other part of that. And so again, that's a perfect example. If you have any specific, very, very, very specific questions, please email me because they probably won't apply to everyone else. But thank you for sending that chat. Okay, we're gonna move on. So the very first part is identifying employers. And so I've listed three main kind of sources here. And I think it's important to realize or to understand that in order to find international friendly employers, you're going to have to use some strategies that domestic students don't have to, or kind of some strategies that seem a little bit backwards, like you're doing this before this, and so forth. And so these are just a couple of the common tools that we have available to all students at K-State, but also kind of those specific resources for international students that we regularly recommend. So first and foremost, please use the Career Center here at K-State. We will do individual appointments right now for the rest of the semester via Zoom, and probably over the summer over Zoom as well. But we will go over cover letters, resumes, CVs. We can do mock interviews. We'll talk to you about salary negotiation. We have free professional clothing for all international students here at the Career Closet. And you can come in to get free clothing from the Career Closet, and you never return those clothes. You keep them forever. I think also for any of you that are looking to go into academia or work in a college or university, we will also review research statements, teaching statements, diversity statements, basically any document that you're preparing to get ready to submit for an opportunity, a job, an internship, etc. We want to help you with that. So the other two bullet points that you can see here, the first one is going global. This is a specific resource that the Career Center pays for all students to have access to. And so I'll show you actually what that website looks like here in a little bit. But I think the biggest things about going global is to know that they have global career guides. So even if you're interested in some job search strategies for maybe your own home country, or maybe a different country other than the United States and other than your home country, they have career guides for many, many, many countries all around the world that address, how do you network in this country? What should my documents look like when applying to these jobs? What are some other professional etiquette that I should be aware of in these countries? What are some common job boards or places to look for jobs for these specific countries? So that is one amazing tool of going global. The second tool in going global is they do have an H-1B search tool. So you can actually use the database and you can look up what companies in, I want to say, at least the past 5 to 8 years have petitioned for an H-1B visa for an employee. And you can see if they applied for those. So that is another great tool within going global. Now, the next resource that I wanted to share is actual data from the US government. So from Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE, but also from the USCIS, but they actually have reports based on what international students in the country are doing as it goes with OPT and H-1B. And so at this time, I'm going to get out of the full screen of this, and I'm going to hop onto the Going Global website. So can I get another thumbs up if you can now see the K-State website, please? Great, okay, thank you. And for this website, I am going to go ahead and put in the chat the website that I'm on. So for those that might be watching this later, it's just the Career Center homepage, so k-state.edu/career center. Then we go to students, the students tab. And then on the left-hand side, diversity and multicultural resources. And then we go down and you can actually look at international students. We have a specific section just for information for international students, which is helpful. But the Going Global link is right here, Going Global. So you click on that. You will have to probably log in with your EID and password, but you can see right here the K-State logo. So again, this is a paid resource that the Career Center pays on behalf of all students. And so you do not have to pay to use this if you go through our website. If you would just Google or look up Going Global on your own, you probably would have to pay for it. So please go through our website. So like I mentioned before, there are the career guides, the country career guides. So you can see all these different countries, and I'll just click on Brazil. And so you can see finding a job, hiring opportunities, getting the job, professional and personal networking, living there, general resources. So those same topics you will find for all of these different countries. So that's very helpful. On the other hand, though, there is a global city career guide section, which has some of the big cities all across the world, but there is also two US city career guides. So if you're looking for a specific urban area or a big area in the country, we do have this as well. So very, very helpful career guides. Now that other piece was the H-1B visa. And so this is where you can use this search engine, type in a keyword, a job title, you can type in a specific company, you can type in a year, and this does go back to 2009, so quite a long number of years. And then you can even define it by state if you wanted to. And you can look through, and you can also download the results into an Excel sheet to even keep better track of those jobs and potentially identify companies who you can then seek out. Again, it's kind of using this reverse mentality of first finding out if they ever have in the past sponsored a student, and then once you get that list, then pursuing those companies to see what job opportunities they may have available. So that's why that is so important there. Going back to this, the other one, so the other examples is the ICE data, which is right here. And let me also then put this in the chat just so you all have that link. So that's ice.gov/CVIS/what's-new, the #tab 2, right here at the top. But what you'll want to do is scroll down to, unfortunately, they do not have the 2020 data of employers posted yet. And so the most recent data that they have posted is 2019. So if you click on 2019 data, and then look at employer data, you can see top 200 employers for OPT and STEM OPT. From 2008 to 2019, top 200 employers for STEM OPT students. There's also some CPT and pre-completion OPT stats as well. So again, really good resources provided directly from the government of companies that international students have worked for, either through their STEM extension or through their post completion OPT or through their CPT. So there's that great information. And then the final one is from USCIS. It's an H-1B employer data hub that you can again look up by employer names, location. There's also a specific code that goes through a couple different general areas to look for. But again, you can see down here if they were approved or denied and what year in which those approvals or denials have taken place. So I think that's another really, really helpful tool to, again, use this kind of reverse job search mentality. So with that, I will go back. You have both of those links. Oh, I did not do this link, excuse me. Let me put that one in the chat just so that you all have that as well to be able to click on that. Okay. Are there any specific questions about any of these online resources that I just presented about? Are there any questions about any of these? Feel free to put them in the chat if you are, or if you do have questions. I'll start referring back to here again. Nothing coming through yet. Let me get back in here then. Okay. If any of you do have questions though, please put them in the chat and I will address them as soon as I notice them and can do that. Okay, one question was, how do sponsorships work? Okay, so that is a specific question about your immigration because that is then about sponsorship. So I would definitely talk to your international student advisor about how sponsorship works. But I think the main thing to understand is that an employer has to apply or petition for that sponsorship on behalf of you. It is not like OPT or CPT where you can apply for it. That employer has to apply or petition for that sponsorship on your behalf. And so that's why tools like the H-1B search tool and the H-1B data hub from the government are really important because not all employers are willing to do that. So it makes more sense to use these tools to identify employers who have petitioned for their employees in the past and kind of go and look for employers through that method. And so again, any other specific questions about sponsorship should be directed to ISSS. Okay, great. Thank you for that question, Lucas. Okay, we're going forward now. One other good tool that I want you all to be aware of is the LinkedIn alumni search tool. So I don't know how many of you are on LinkedIn, but I would definitely encourage those of you who do have LinkedIn to utilize the LinkedIn alumni search that is located within within your profile. And actually, let me just go here and just pick up the link. I made a handout that goes specifically through how to access this information. So let me put that in the chat. Great. So there is basically a guide then that shows you how to access the LinkedIn alumni search tool. But essentially, you are able to go and look up Kansas State University, the school, then the K-State University's page will pop up on LinkedIn. Then you can click on the alumni tab, and then you can filter by where they live, where they work, what they do, what they studied. I traditionally start with what they studied at K-State to match up with your major, and then you can then go into where do they live and filter it down more from that. But this is a great way to identify K-State alums who majored in exactly what you're majoring in and who are living in those geographic locations that you want to relocate to. So again, this LinkedIn alumni search tool, it's great. Utilize that sheet that I just gave you, or if you have more questions about the LinkedIn alumni search tool, please email me directly and we can definitely do a demo of that personally with you. But again, this is a great way to identify not only alumni that you can reach out to, but also once you put on the filters, this section right here where they work, it will automatically regenerate based on the other information that you've put in about what they've studied, where they live. And so then right in this column, you'll automatically have a list of employers and companies that you can also investigate. So it's very, very helpful with networking and looking for potential employers. Okay, so I put this screenshot here because this is what we, here in the Career Center, we utilize the handshake system. And so I'm sure a number of you have already looked at the job database within your handshake account. Some of you may not have, but I just wanted to show you, this is the screen that employers see when they post a job onto Handshake. And so again, this is not what you, the student or the applicant, will see. This is what the employer sees when they post the job in the Handshake system. And many other systems or places where jobs are posted have similar questions like this. And so I thought it was important to show you all what they are clicking, which could determine if you are eligible to apply for a position or if they throw out your application because of how you answer some of these. And so that first one is, does this position require US work authorization? So most of the people say, yes, it does require work authorization. And later in the presentation, we're going to cover how you should answer these questions. But again, I just wanted to show you the employer's view of how they select some of these things. Then the next question in Handshake that an employer is asked is eligibility for international students or non-US students or permanent residents. Would you sponsor a work visa for the right candidate? And so for this particular job, their answer was no. However, as many of us know, if you use OPT or CPT, there is no sponsorship that is needed based on those work authorizations. So that question in itself, just the way that the Handshake system asks, is kind of unclear. You will see that this is highlighted in blue. So employers or recruiters, if they do want to learn more about this question, they could click this and find more information. But for me, though, it's still very unclear for a hiring manager or a recruiter if they do not have much experience or much knowledge about work authorizations and visa statuses and requirements. This could be an unclear question for them as well. Then that last question that an employer is asked before they post a job is, are you willing to hire candidates that are temporarily authorized to work for a defined period in their field of study? So then this is that specific OPT, CPT question, but they might already be confused by the second question and could potentially hit no here again, like this job did. And again, I don't think employers realize that if they hit yes on this, that there is, again, no obligation to their company under OPT or CPT for sponsorship again. So just wanted to show you all these questions because sometimes a recruiter or an employer, they may not know the ins and outs of work authorization. So they might select no and no when really truly their company might be welcoming. It's just that individual recruiter might not know exactly what buttons to hit here. And so that's why I say at the bottom of this presentation, once these questions are answered, or once they're explained to those recruiters, the answer of if they would be willing to sponsor for the right candidate or would be willing to temporarily hire or to hire candidates with those temporary work authorizations, the answer could be different once it's explained. So that's a good time when you would reach out to HR or reach out and talk to that recruiter a little bit more. And again, they might not know the answer themselves, so they might refer you to their corporate HR or to another contact. So just to be aware that not all the time will recruiters know the ins and outs of their immigration or work authorization policies. Another thing I wanted to mention, maybe it's a nationwide or a global company, that there are multiple offices all around the country or world. It could be that maybe an office in Ohio may not specifically hire international students, but maybe their office in San Francisco or New York does. Maybe they're very familiar with hiring international students. So it could even be a difference between those offices. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but it is very possible. So I just encourage you, when you're applying for these positions, and if you're questioning whether your application could be filtered out or if they won't even accept your application, if it is a larger company, I would probably recommend reaching out to HR and just specifying that absolutely, this is their policy. Now, on some jobs, they might absolutely put very plainly US citizens only. And in those cases, they probably know what they're talking about. But this is just to provide a little bit more clarification on this part. Okay. Now we're going to transition to the resume and CV portion of the presentation. So we've talked about some strategies or some ways to identify international friendly employers. And just kind of that last slide was, again, kind of about deep diving or exploring more about what's going through the minds of recruiters or employers when they're posting jobs or looking for talent. So now I just wanted to quickly review resumes and CVs because I think it's important to realize there is a difference between what a resume is and what a CV is here in the United States. So I just wanted to quickly address that. So first and foremost, a resume is what is typically used in industry. So if you're looking for any industry jobs, you will want to create a resume. So a resume is only going to be 1 to 2 pages long. It will be a very brief or very short, but very targeted, specific, concise page that highlights your skills that directly relate to this specific job. So it's going to be very targeted to that job and going to be, again, only 1 or 2 pages in length. Now, a CV in the United States is a longer document. And like it says down here, a CV or a curriculum vitae is only really used if you're applying for a job in academia or a research job. And as you all probably know, a CV, or if you would talk to your PI or your major faculty member, CVs in academia can be 20 plus pages long. Everything in the world or every committee, anything that academic has ever done is listed on a CV. So that's why they're so long. And so that main difference then is a resume is only 1 to 2 pages, and you're only going to highlight or make known the very specific skill sets that you have for that one particular job. Whereas the CV is much more expanded and talks about a wide variety of skills, even skills that might not be as applicable to that job as others. And so that's the difference between a resume and a CV. And I know that, a CV in other countries could mean a resume. And so there is sometimes that confusion of, do I submit a resume or do I submit a CV? And again, my rule of thumb is if it's an industry position, use a resume. If it's an academic or research forward focused position, then you probably use a CV. But at all times, go with the directions that are in that job description. And one other thing I'll say about utilizing that job description, only submit those materials that they're asking for. Let's say, for instance, that you're applying to an academic job where they might ask for a CV, a letter of intent, a research statement, and a diversity statement, and references, of course. But let's say you're debating if you want to include your T-vals. They did not ask for T-vals, so I would not include your T-vals. As you all know, the job market is very, very, very competitive right now in both industry and academia. And so some companies are even filtering out applicants who don't specifically follow their directions. So for instance, if you would include your T-val, but they didn't ask for one, that could be enough for that company to decide, oh, nope, Andrew didn't follow directions, we're not going to review his application materials. So very much look at that job description, look at those requirements, and follow them very closely and precisely. Only send what they're asking for. I think I covered everything I wanted to here. No questions in the chat so far. Okay, let's keep going. Some other considerations when you're constructing either your CV or your resume is you want to think about who is your audience, or who are going to be the individuals reading these documents. Are they going to be the human resources or HR managers? Are they going to be your supervisor? Are they going to be a pool or search committee of academics? What is the specific opportunity? Is it going to be a full-time job? Is it for academia? Is it for industry? Is it for an internship, etc.? So just kind of thinking about who will be reading this, what is who will be the audience for this, and then kind of editing it for that. I already talked about utilizing the job description to fully understand the requirements for that specific job, but you also want to use similar phrases, similar words, similar terminology that you found in that job description on your documents, because a number of labs, of companies, especially the bigger companies or labs are using applicant tracking systems or ATS systems. And that's essentially the artificial intelligence, the AI of the recruitment and hiring world. So they're using algorithms, they're using computers to scan hundreds, thousands of applications to their jobs and only pick out the ones that most closely align or match with that job description or those specific skill sets that they've put into the system. And so it's very important. You know, you might know exactly how something you've listed translates to the job description, but if it's not plain in black and white and very clear, or using the same words that you found in the job description, that's not going to help you. So you have to, I know it's so weird to understand, but you have to kind of design these documents with the thought in mind that a computer might be the first person to review your documents rather than an actual human. So I know it's a very weird concept, but something that we need to think of. I got a question. Is it advisable to display your GPA on your resume or your CV? Sure, you absolutely can. For industry, GPA isn't a huge thing. They really want to make sure that you have the skill sets versus your GPA. I mean, if you have a 3.75 GPA or a 4.0 GPA, by all means, put the GPA on there. If it's below a 3.5 though, and if they don't say that you're required to put the GPA on the document in the job description, then I probably wouldn't worry about including that GPA. Great question. The very last part, it says you will eventually need to develop multiple versions of your documents to best highlight your skills for these specific opportunities. And so I know I've talked with students in the past that they just want to create one document and use that one document to apply for, you know, upwards of 200 jobs. However, if you don't take the time to individualize or tailor these documents to those specific jobs, your chances of getting a callback or an interview are going to go down dramatically. Because for someone who reviews resumes and CVs often, I can tell immediately if I am reviewing a standard resume, one that was made that is used for all these job applications, or a document that has been tailored specifically for my job. We can tell that instantly. And so tailoring is always good. And I know that that adds even more time and work for when you're applying to these jobs, but at the same time, they're gonna yield the best results. And so even if you have a top section that's like a summary of qualifications or a skills section, even if you're swapping out those to match those jobs, that is even something that you're doing to increase your chances. So definitely encourage you to do that. Now, as you can also see though in the blue, tailoring is always good. However, do not forget what you change and where you change it. We have heard so many times from HR, recruiters, employers, that the worst thing that they can see is when they're reading your cover letter or when you're reading your resume and they put a different company's name in there or a different school's name. That makes them want to scrap everything and just start again when there's little typos like that. So if you do make individual or tailored mentions of their company or their job, make sure you always remember to change that before you apply to a different place. I actually just yesterday had a student who came in that had a statement at the top of their resume that they were looking for a spring 2022 internship, okay? This student had made this resume in a class a couple of years ago in a career prep class where they were working on their documents to get ready for the future. Well, the student had forgot to update that statement. And so that student is actually looking for internships for this spring in 2021 versus in 2022. So that is a huge, huge thing that as employers or recruiters are reading it, they see the statement that says looking for a spring 2022 internship. So of course, they're not going to look at it any further because that's a whole year in advance. And so the student was very concerned that they weren't getting any callbacks or very many interviews. Well, I think a big part of it was because of that date that the student had completely overlooked. So it's very good to have close eyes on your documents. And that's, again, another reason why it's a good idea to make an appointment with the Career Center so that we can be that extra set of eyes on your documents for you. One other thing I wanted to mention is that if any of you are graduate research assistants, graduate teaching assistants, it's probably a good idea to consider what skills or how you list certain skills associated with those positions. So for instance, if you're applying to a job in academia that is maybe 50% teaching, 50% research, then you absolutely will want to talk about your teaching skills and your teaching experiences. However, if you're applying for a research job in industry, you probably won't want to talk about the teaching components, but rather focus on the lab skills from the assistantships that you did, or that lab management, etc. And so that's one way to look at that. Then another thing would be, if you're applying to a job in academia, you would want to use students, mentored students, supervised students, taught and graded students' work. However, if it's in industry, you'd probably want to change that word to clients. So met with clients to discuss this, or supported clients through these measures. So keywords, terminology, changing different things, it's going to make a world of a difference for these employers. Okay, we're going to go on. Now, this is a very, very, very important part about resumes and CVs. So I know that all of you are from all different countries, from all over the world. Well, that also means that there are different expectations for resumes and CVs also all over the world. So in the United States, what not to include, you do not want to include marital status, your age, your date of birth, a photo of yourself. You do not want to list any education prior to or before college or university. You do not want to list your national ID number or your citizenship, where you were a citizen of. The United States has very specific non-discrimination laws when it comes to hiring. And so if they would see any of these things or a picture, they would probably delete them or cover them with a box or clear them out before they would ever distribute it because of those non-discrimination laws. So you do not want to have those things on your document. So again, you will have more success applying to jobs, getting interviews, if you follow the US customs for resumes and CVs. And so I just have a quick example then, this image, the information that have the red dots by them, those are things that I would not include for a US application. This is a CV example, so this would be more specifically for academia, but even so, you would not list date of birth, you're not list the passport number, nationality, marital status, there would be no photo, you would remove all of that. Even a step further, some students, even some domestic students, are not even including their physical or mailing address anymore either, because so much of the communication is done over email, over phone, etc. And so some students are even taking out their physical mailing address too, which isn't a huge thing because a lot of times on applications, you're submitting your address on there anyway. So just some things to think about there. But these are definitely the things you should not include on resumes or CVs in the United States. Going on to our next topic of possible bias. So we know that bias is a real thing when it comes to looking for jobs and applications based on even names, as simple as names. And so this is just a quick little section to tell you that you can decide how you want to display your name on your document. So your resume is not a legal document per se. And so for instance, if you typically have 4 names that you list on any of your documents. For the US job application, you could just do the first name and the family name, just to be more aligned with how US names are. Or if you go by a different name in the United States, feel free to list that preferred name on your applications versus your full legal name. So just so you know, some students have found that they have more luck or better chances by using their US name or a shortened name. But again, that resume is not that legal document, so it is acceptable to use your preferred name. However, in the application process, you will want to use your full legal name, because that's the information that is used for background checks, social security documents, insurance forms, and things like that. So making sure that you can use a preferred name on resumes and CVs, but when it comes to filling out information for HR, human resources for that company, you definitely want to use your full legal name. So just a quick little thing like that. Now, the part 2 of this, though, is I know a number of you are graduate students, and so we love data. We love studies, and so I actually found the SHRM study, and the source is listed there too, but it was a study done on bias that did have specific ties to students studying in STEM field and looking at possible ways in which they did experience bias. And so they did kind of a mock hiring thing in the study, but this is a quote: "Companies hiring for STEM roles rated candidates with female and minority names lower than candidates with white male names. On average, a female or minority candidate with a 4.0 GPA received the same rating as a white man with a 3.75 GPA." So this was very interesting to me. And so I just wanted to show that, there has been studies on this, that bias is a thing when you're looking for jobs or when you're applying to different opportunities, unfortunately. Again, I put on here, federal, state, and sometimes even local laws exist which prohibit employment discrimination based on a number of things, but mostly including race, religion, national origin, sex, citizenship, sexual orientation, and disabilities. I mentioned at the very beginning that there are certain questions that employers cannot ask in interviews, or that are inappropriate to ask during interviews. And so some of those areas, or some of those questions, focus around those same things, such as race, religion, national origin or citizenship, disabilities, arrest records, family obligations. That we do have our resume and interview guide, and so at the end I will include a link to the resume and interview guide, but on page 64 of that guide there are more examples of illegal or inappropriate questions that employers should not be asking you. And one of the common questions that I get too is, how do I respond if I do get a question like this? And I think a lot of times it's just easy to be very polite and just say, actually, I don't feel comfortable answering that question at this time, as it doesn't really affect my candidacy for this position, and then just go on. I have also heard stories from some students who are applying to jobs in academia that, before COVID, they would invite the top 3 or so candidates on campus for an interview. And a lot of times there would be like an evening meal or more of a social time. And so in those situations, you do have to kind of use your own judgment, because someone might just be making small talk and asking, oh, will a partner or a family be coming with you? They might not mean it, negatively, or they may not be asking for HR or legal reasons. They're just making conversation. And so sometimes you have to be the judge of how comfortable you feel talking about those things as you're still being considered as a candidate. So just some things to know about possible bias and how to handle some of those questions that could come your way. Now we get to the immigration question portion of the presentation. A number of you had asked about these specific questions in the registration form, and so I definitely wanted to make sure that we covered this. So the most recognized or the most used questions that we see on applications are in purple here. So question number 1, are you legally authorized to work in the United States? And question 2, will you now or in the future require visa sponsorship? So let's talk about this first question. Are you legally authorized to work in the United States? You should answer yes, because as an international student, depending on if you're an F1 or even a J1, depending on who you're being sponsored by on that J, you are authorized or eligible to apply for work authorization. So yes, you have that opportunity. So yes, you are authorized to potentially work in the United States. So first question, yes. Question number 2, will you now or in the future require visa sponsorship? Now, this is a question that I have seen evolved a little bit. So in the past, sometimes the question was, would you require sponsorship for this position at this time? And if you're using OPT, the answer would be no. For at this time, no, I don't. But then HR and employers started realizing we need to think bigger picture or broader for this question. And so then they asked, will you now or in the future require visa sponsorship? And unfortunately, even if you don't need sponsorship to work a year for OPT, that answer is still going to probably be yes. Even if you have a STEM extension, eventually you will need sponsorship to work longer than those authorized times. So that should be yes. Now, one way that this kind of gets in the way is for internship positions. So sometimes when internships are posted on HR or on company web pages, they use the same hiring system to take in candidates for internships. Internships are a whole nother thing that could potentially use different work authorizations other than OPT and things like that. And so sometimes just the form or the application process doesn't fit the opportunity. So again, I would advocate or tell you to contact HR directly and ask them, I am eligible to use this work authorization that requires nothing of your company to do this summer internship. So can I do this? Because on your HR page, it asks, will you now or in the future require visa sponsorship? I'm not planning to work here in the future, and this is not for a full-time job. This is just for a temporary summer internship, let's say. So greater or bigger conversations with HR could be appropriate at that point. Now, this next part, it says student example. This is how one question was recently worded on an application that a student here at K-State encountered. So let me read that. Are you either a US citizen or legally authorized to work for any US employer on a full-time basis without the need for sponsorship now or in the future? If hired, you must provide proof of authorization to work within 3 business days of employment. So this company took basically those 2 purple questions and combined it into one question, which is not helpful for your chances because you're not a US citizen. You are legally authorized to work because you have that authorization to apply for work authorization based on your visa, but it says without the need for sponsorship now or in the future. And that gets to that second question up above, that yes, eventually you will need that sponsorship. So this is a very poorly worded question for an application. And again, this would warrant me to contact their HR and get clarification for that, or let them know that their system is not inclusive for that. Have a question. Could you please go through your response to the second question? Okay, so will you now or in the future require visa sponsorship? So again, if you're on OPT, OPT allows you to work for an employer for a specified amount of time that does not require sponsorship. So that employer does not have to apply for an extended work authorization on your behalf, right? So if it was just a will you now require visa sponsorship, that would be no. But because of the way that this question is now regularly worded, will you now or in the future require visa sponsorship, we have to answer yes, because there is only so much free time, if you will, that OPT and a STEM extension can give us, because eventually we will need an employer to sponsor us, or it's a whole nother visa status outside of that student visa. And again, I don't want to get into immigration specifics, but that question, will you now or in the future, it's going to be yes, because eventually you will need that company to provide some type of sponsorship if you're not planning to, get a green card, get married, other specific factors. But the typical answer is yes, in the future you will eventually need sponsorship. I hope that answers or clarifies that question. Great, good. Okay, and now at the very bottom it says, know how to explain your status and when to bring it up. Okay, so I think it's always important to realize if you're ever asked, because if you're at a career fair or if you're talking one-on-one with an employer, they might ask you casually, oh, where are you from? And you can say, oh, originally I'm from here, but I'm a current student at K-State. But they should ask you just how they have it worded. Are you legally authorized to work in the United States? That's how they should word it. And you could say, yes, as a F1 student, I am eligible to apply for work authorization. And you can just keep it as simple as that. Or if they seem like they kind of know their stuff, then you could say, then I am eligible or authorized to apply for OPT, which gives me a year without your company's sponsorship to work at your company, and things like that. However, let's again use the example of talking to a recruiter at a career fair. These might just be typical college recruiters, and they might not know the ins and outs of their immigration policies. And so this might be the point where disclosing too much might overwhelm them. And so you might want to keep it just light and specific on the skills. So I usually say just stick to your skills, what you can bring to that position, and not bring up immigration. However, if it is asked, be sure that you are prepared and ready to clearly state or explain your work authorization possibilities for their company. So there is that balancing act of how much to say and when to say it, right? Okay, great. Okay, so that was a very quick presentation, even though we're at that hour, so we did use most of that time. As you can see, my email address is right here, so feel free to take a picture of that. I can also put that in the chat, just so that everyone has that. So a reminder that here in the Career Center, you can schedule your appointments via the handshake system. However, the handshake system will place you with your appropriate career advisor. So I work with arts and sciences graduate students and students within the College of Architecture, Planning, and Design. However, if you fall outside of those two areas, when you go into handshake, you won't be able to schedule an appointment with me. But if you would like to meet with me, just send me an email. The email address I just put in the chat and that's on the screen right now. And I will absolutely be happy to meet with you to talk about some of these specifics. So at this time, if you feel that we have adequately answered your questions, then at this time you're more than welcome to log off. Again, this presentation will be uploaded to the Career Center YouTube page, and so you will have access to the whole thing on there within a couple of days if you want to review anything. Otherwise, at this time, I'm going to address some of the questions that were asked on the registration. Or if you have additional questions, please put them in the chat and we can go from there too. So why don't I go ahead and stop my share. So we're back here with everybody. I'm going to go through some of these real quick and then I'll hit end on the recording and then we can jump into a few more questions after that. Let me check my chat again. Okay. Expert response you shared for the status questions. Okay, so if anybody has additional questions, again, feel free to email me. And yes, again, I just mentioned that, yes, this presentation will be uploaded to the Career Center YouTube channel. Okay, so let me go into some of these questions. So I had asked, what are some specific questions that you have regarding your job search? So one of this says, what are the possibilities of an international student being preferred for an industry job? So the way I understand this is, how do I have success or luck in getting an industry job? So I think number one is kind of what we had reviewed, is that you want to make sure your document is very specific for that industry. And so, for instance, if you currently have a CV that has a lot of, your academic posters, presentation, university service, for an industry job, you will want to make a resume, that 1 to 2 page, very specific document. So that's when you will have some of your best chances there. When to ask if visa or OPT STEM support is provided. So again, for OPT and the STEM extension, that's all on you. That's going to be all with you and the ISSS office. The employer might fill out a quick little form, but that's just an internal form for ISSS, and there will not be any specific sponsorship from that company. However, I think what they're also asking is that eventual H-1B sponsorship. So using those strategies that I said, kind of using that reverse job search in trying to identify who those employers are who in the past have sponsored, using those tools, I think is a great way. Otherwise, if once you do have kind of that one-on-one discussion with your employer, then you can kind of talk like, I am authorized to, work for 1 year on my OPT. Beyond that, I would require sponsorship. Is your company familiar with doing that or willing to sponsor me after my work authorization has expired based on my student visa? So I know those are very specific things to say, but there is that difference of when an employer doesn't need to do anything and when an employer would need to do something. Another question is, how do I gauge the employer's actual knowledge of employing an international worker respectfully? Then again, I would encourage you to go and look at the resume and interview guide and look on page 64. And I just realized I promised to put that link in the chat, and so I will do that right now. But I think a lot of it has to do with what specific questions they ask and how they ask it. Because if they ask some of those more inappropriate questions or are asking you about your family or anything like that, and how that might affect your work or something like that, that would be something pretty much that would raise a red flag that would say, I don't know if that would be appropriate, and things like that. So I think just looking to see, also using the LinkedIn alumni search tool to see who else works at that company. Even on LinkedIn, if you look up Cerner or Coke or any other companies, there is a people tab for most of the companies, and you can see which individuals have said that they've worked at in the past or currently work at that company to kind of see what type of diversity does pop up on LinkedIn. So that is also a good way. Oh, and I just realized I put that link to a specific person and not to everyone. There you go. One question, could you please let us know how to negotiate the salary during an interview? Unfortunately, that is a whole bigger conversation. I give hour-long presentations just on that topic. So if you would like to know that, please email me. We'll set up an appointment and we can specifically talk about your situation. But yeah, for all of you, I'd be happy to talk about salary negotiation if you have those questions. I would also recommend that there is another service available to all of you, PowerCat Financial. It's basically your own financial advisor that you have free access to because of your student fees. They're located in the student union, and you can look up PowerCat Financial, and they are excellent in reviewing offers with students, that go into the specific details about insurance, retirement, other benefits. They are fantastic at going through those things, whereas the Career Center is really good with how to approach negotiation, how to kind of talk about those things as you're still in that negotiation or job process. So another question. No, unfortunately, someone asked, so if I only want to work in the United States for 2 years using my OPT, so I'm assuming that this individual wants to use their regular OPT and their STEM OPT to get to that 2 years. Can I say that I don't need visa sponsorship now or in the future? No, I would still say that yes, you eventually will need it. So even if you have a plan right now that you're not going to stay past that, I would still put yes. I'd be very hesitant to put no, because something that you put on an application 2 years in the past can come and haunt you 2 years in the future. We can never know what's going to happen in 2 years. So I would be very honest when answering those. So another question, so working in the United States with an F1 visa after 1 year of finishing college requires sponsorship. Is that correct? Also, you can get paid on internships. Okay, so it'll depend what your major is on your documents, because certain majors do have extra time after that 1 year. That's with the STEM extension, but again, that's a very specific question for ISSS. Can you get paid on internships? Yes, you can get paid, but there will be additional paperwork that you'll have to fill out. I mean, whether or not you're getting paid or not, you're going to have to get a social security number, and that again goes through ISSS for that process. Okay, good questions. Let me get back to the Excel sheet here. Should I look for an internship or a full-time job after I graduate? Well, that's up to you. Do you want to work in the United States? Because even if that question is a maybe, absolutely, you're going to have to look for jobs. So there's that. When is the best time to look for a job if you plan to graduate this December? I think it does depend on industry versus academia. Academia plans to schedule things a little bit sooner. So if they're going to be looking for someone for, let's see, for spring, then they're probably going to be starting their search or getting their stuff out probably in October-ish to fill a vacancy that they know of for the spring. So probably 2 to 3 months before you're wanting to work, should you start looking for things. What are some strategies that I can do to stand out when applying for a job as an international student? I think one of the things is highlight your language skills that you have. I think language skills are very important. Approaching things on your resume or in your cover letter that talk about bringing a global perspective to that company or to that opportunity. Domestic students usually cannot speak on that very much. So if you come in with your documents and say that you have a global approach, or you have global collaborators that you've worked with in the past, that can be a big thing, especially again, kind of for academia. If you're going into a faculty or a research position, if you say, you know, I have these research connections in these specific countries or in these other places in the world, that could be very appealing to a school or a university to establish new connections in new places. So that could be really great too. I'm applying for OPT. What are the best routes for this new path? Start with ISSS. You really need to understand that full process of OPT and what that looks like. Is it okay to follow up on a job application we've submitted and ask for an update? Yes, it is, but you need to be respectful of the time. So for instance, if on the job description, it says, you know, submit application materials by this date, or a review of application materials will begin on this date, do not ask for an update until after those dates, because they've said in that job description, they're not going to be reviewing things till those dates. If you've submitted something and maybe there wasn't a date posted, or it's past the date that they posted, maybe 2 or 3 weeks after that, and you still haven't heard anything, then yes, it would be appropriate to reach out and ask for an update. However, at the same time, if you ever get an interview for a job, employers expect you to ask them questions, and usually you get time at the very end of an interview to ask them questions. One of your questions, I always tell my students to prepare at least 3 questions, but one of those questions I recommend my students always ask is, what is your timeline for this search? Or when could I expect to hear something about this search? Or when are you hoping to have a person in this position by? So you should never leave an interview without asking at least one of those questions, so that you have some type of an idea of how long the process is going to take, or what next steps will look like. Okay. In addition to LinkedIn and other job portals, are there any dedicated resources for international students? I talked about going global, that can be helpful. There are other H-1B tools, H-1B search tools online. Just a caution though, I would never pay for a service to help you that promise you specific results, or that make you pay to get specific H-1B information, because the government releases it for free, going global has it for free. So just be very leery of how you approach certain things like that. That's a pretty specific question. What are the challenges international students have when looking for internships or full-time jobs after finishing university? I think one thing is that bias, which we talked about some bias that students might have. I think the other thing that maybe makes it a little bit harder for international students is that if a company is not willing to sponsor you beyond that 1 year or that extended time based on your work authorization, then a company really has to ask themselves, am I willing to put all this time and energy to train this individual, to acclimate, to get this international student part of my company, with the full knowledge that I am not prepared to sponsor them to go beyond that time? Is it worth it to get that 1 to 2 years time with them? So I think that's something that goes through the minds of a lot of employers who are not willing to sponsor students. So I think that those are kind of 2 big hurdles that you might have to overcome. I think we talked about that. How to use keywords effectively during the job searching process. So like I said, utilize those job descriptions, use those same words, technology or terminology and phrases that are on the job description. That job description is going to be a mountain of wealth for you. Also for academic jobs, when they ask for cover letters or teaching statement, research statement, etc., you have to realize that in academia, writing is such an important skill, and perhaps some of the industry jobs too. And so you have to realize that if you're given the option to submit a cover letter, I probably still would, because that will basically be the only writing sample that they will have from you. I mean, a resume is pretty much bulleted, so pretty much to that point, a CV follows kind of that same rule, but a cover letter is written correspondence. It's going to be their only writing example that they have from you. So that's also very important to include if it's required or if it's an option. That's a very specific question. How to find companies that give visa sponsorship. We talked about that. Can you know the reason for rejection? That's a good question. So if you get rejected from a job, can you ask why? You absolutely can ask. You can say, you know, wait until they tell you, obviously, but then respond back. And you always want to say, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for letting me know. As I prepare to apply for other positions, would you be willing to share any feedback with me from my interview or from my time with you that could help me, you know, with a different opportunity? I don't think I would just email back and say, why wasn't I hired? You still want to be very professional, and you still want to maintain those professional connections, because you don't know, you got rejected from this job, but the next job they post could be the one that they think of you for, or that you apply for again. So at all times, be professional about that. Okay, do any of you have any additional questions? Feel free to put them in the chat. Someone talked about e-verification for company sponsorship. How do you know if a company is e-verify? The government does have a database that you can check which companies are e-verified. So you can just do a quick Google search, find the government website for that. Some of these questions are very specific immigration questions. So please contact your international student advisor to understand how to do that. We're getting close to an hour and a half here, so I think I'm going to end it here soon. But are there any additional questions? And again, if you have a very specific question, please email me. But are there any other just general questions about any of the information we've reviewed? Any other final thoughts? How early should you look for work and apply for OPT documents? So look on the ISSS website. They have a whole section about working off campus, and that kind of goes into the early details of OPT that talks about that timeline. They also have a presentation that you have to view or go to attend, and then you know all the ins and outs for the OPT timeline. But how early should you look for work though? Again, I would look and see of when you're graduating, and a couple months, probably 2 to 3 months before you graduate is definitely when you want to be looking for jobs. Yeah, I don't want to say too much more because it will really depend on how early you apply for OPT and when you apply for OPT. And right now the processing times are not predictable. A lot of the processing times are taking longer than usual. And I've worked with several students who have a job waiting for them, but they're just waiting for their documents for that final approval. And that can be really stressful. And so you definitely want to make sure you're taking you understand that process and that timeline for your OPT. Okay. All right. Well, with that, before I leave, I'll just one more time put a link for you to access all of these slides, if that's helpful for you all, so that you can view those. Let me come back here and put that in here. Okay, there again are all of my slides. Again, this will be posted on the Career Center's YouTube channel, and please contact me directly if you have more specific questions. And just remember, the Career Center is always here to help you, to support you. And we even meet with students a year after graduation too. So don't think that you have to just meet with us while you're still a student. A year after graduation, you still have full access to all of our resources. You can attend our career fairs, our events, things like that. So always remember that too. All right. Well, thank you all so much for attending. I hope you learned something useful, and come and see us so we can help you out with whatever you might need pertaining your job search. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.